Hello, welcome to the very first video of my new channel, Motoring Memoirs. On this channel we'll be doing quick driving impressions of mostly new vehicles to give you an idea of what it's like behind the wheel. I'll also be talking a little bit about the interior quality and comfort. I'll also be pointing out any kind of issues or annoyances that come up during my time with the vehicle. Most of my reviews will be based on a relatively short amount of time that I'll have with each car, but this vehicle today is an exception because this is my personally owned vehicle and it's been my daily driver for about 7 years, so it'll be more in-depth than usual. With that, today I'm adding this 2014 Ford Focus ST to the book. Oh, it's roads like this where this vehicle really shines. So, what is the 2014 Ford Focus ST like to drive? It's got 252 horsepower, 270 pound-feet of torque, which takes it from 0 to 60 in about 6.1 seconds, or at least it did when the vehicle was new. Is that lightning quick by today's standards? No, but it's plenty fast enough. And I find that actually it feels a lot faster than that in this vehicle, partly because of the torque steer, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And partly also just because it is a relatively firm ride. Everything feels connected. It's a manual transmission. You just have a lot more fun driving this vehicle than you think you might. 6.1 seconds is more than enough in a vehicle like this, and we're on the highway at the moment. It's also more than enough for passing. As we head into a corner here, I should mention the suspension is firm. It's fairly stiff, but not to the point of being uncomfortable, although you'd have to judge for yourself. I have done an 8,000 kilometer road trip in this vehicle and never had any issue, didn't develop any back problems. The seat itself, I wouldn't describe it as plush, certainly, but strangely it's not uncomfortable, despite how relatively firm the seat is and how relatively firm the suspension is. It's good for long drives. When the vehicle first came out, it got a lot of flack from reviewers for these seats, which I will say are very bolstered. They're pretty tight. I wouldn't want to be a much larger person than what I am. I can see how they would be uncomfortable if you were a larger person. But for me, they're just about right. They hold you perfectly well in the corners. And even when you're driving around town, at first they feel a little bit snug, but you get used to it fairly quickly. And it hasn't been an issue during my period of ownership. The only time sometimes passengers who don't know what to expect getting into the vehicle have a little bit of trouble because it's hard to get in and out of, I will say. The bolstering on the seat, on the bottom portion of the seat, makes it a little bit hard to kind of climb into and out of, but that's not such a big deal. And again, you get used to it pretty quickly. The steering in this vehicle is excellent. It is very heavy. I noticed that I don't really notice it as a matter of course. I've gotten used to it maybe during my period of ownership, and I don't think I ever really noticed it in the beginning after I purchased the vehicle either. But I do notice it when I drive something else. So if I go on vacation, I rent a vehicle for a few days or a week or whatever. When I come home and I drive the Focus, I realize how heavy it is, rather, compared to other vehicles. But again, that's not such a bad thing. It's communicative. You always get great feeling through the wheel. I've never had any issue with that. and you always know exactly what it's going to be doing in a corner. We'll be hitting some good corners a little bit further on up here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the steering then. Again, with the suspension, it's relatively firm. I don't know if you can hear that right now. We're going over some bumps, and it does vibrate. I don't know if it's going to come across on the microphone or not, but there are some squeaks and rattles, and my camera itself is vibrating right now, but hopefully you can't hear that or see it in the image. In terms of sound, I have to say the exhaust is one of the things that kind of lets you down in this vehicle. Not necessarily, and that can be remedied with an aftermarket solution. There's plenty of aftermarket exhausts available for this vehicle if you want to increase the sound a little. But I was disappointed Ford didn't do a better job from the factory. There are examples of great sounding 4-cylinder, so it can be done. I mean, the Neon SRT4, probably the best sounding 4-cylinder engine right out of the factory. So I don't know why more manufacturers don't achieve a better exhaust note in a 4-cylinder, but for whatever reason they don't or choose not to. And of course now I know in modern times the European standards are making it more and more difficult to have a good sounding exhaust. So the exhaust in this, it's not terrible. It does have a little bit of grumble to it, but nothing like a Boxer, like a WRX, for example. What you do get a lot of in this vehicle, especially if you replace the air filter with an aftermarket solution and remove the lid from the airbox, is you get a lot of blow-off and turbo sound. So what it lacks in exhaust, it makes up for in turbo sound. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it right now. But yeah, it is a great sounding engine. Lots of intake noise. So as I said, this vehicle handles very well. The Fiesta ST, it has to be said, was a better handling vehicle. If all you care about is handling, if you live somewhere where you've got access to a lot of winding roads, absolutely I would go with the Fiesta ST. As I said, I also test drove that when I purchased this Focus. Here in Alberta, Canada, unfortunately, we don't have very many winding roads. BC is a much better place for that kind of vehicle. So I did end up going with the Focus ST just because it has a little more power and it's a little bit more fun and exciting to drive on a daily basis. Going through these bends, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but the vehicle's very level. It doesn't lean very much. Again, I know exactly what it's going to do. It's a predictable vehicle. Oh, it's roads like this where this vehicle really shines. Oh, it is a pleasure to drive this vehicle. I'm going to miss it. At the time that I'm making this video, I am selling the vehicle or trying to sell the vehicle. So this will be my first review on YouTube, hopefully the first of many. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're going back and looking through my previous videos, I appreciate it. Appreciate the views. Traffic slowed down here a little bit, so it's a good time to talk about fuel economy. As I said, this is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine with a turbocharger, and it's putting out about 252 horsepower, 270 pound-feet of torque, or at least it was from the factory. I don't know what mine is currently generating. And fuel economy's been, I would say, surprisingly good. Are they great numbers for a 2-liter 4-cylinder? No. But for a vehicle with a turbocharger that can accelerate as quickly as this one does, I've been more than happy with fuel economy. So I've had this car for about 7 years, going on 7 years now, and during that time it's averaged 8.6 liters per 100 kilometers, which comes out to about 27, 28 US miles per gallon, which is pretty decent. I was looking it up the other day. The regular non-turbocharged Focus only gets about 33 US miles per gallon. So you're only paying about a, 15-20% penalty for a lot more performance. Again, and if you're looking at a vehicle like this, obviously performance matters to you. So is it worth it? Absolutely. And I don't think anyone would be cross-shopping this with a regular Focus anyway. If you're cross-shopping this, some of the competitors at the time, again, it's the 2014, would have been either Ford's own Fiesta ST, another great option, or Volkswagen's Golf GTI, or Golf R if you want to spend a little more for all-wheel drive. There is, of course, now the Ford Focus RS as well. When I purchased this vehicle, I also test drove the GTI and the Fiesta ST. Both were fantastic vehicles. The GTI was a lot more buttoned down. Everything felt more well engineered. It was a little bit more compliant, more quiet. The interior was a higher quality. And so for a lot of people, that's why the GTI is the hot hatch standard, really. If you're looking at GTI, or if you're looking at hot hatches rather, you should absolutely take a look at the GTI, and the new Mark 8 has just come out. In any case, so if I'm saying the GTI was better than the Focus ST in so many ways, why did I buy the Focus ST? One of the reasons was one of the things that a lot of reviewers actually complained about, which is the torque steer, which is a strange thing to like, but what I found is that it actually makes this a more engaging, more exciting vehicle to drive. Some people would say, well, yeah, because it's not as well engineered. Fair enough. And so I would encourage you to test drive both and compare and see which one feels better to you, see which one you like more. Again, I would say the GTI is a better vehicle, but there was just something about this Focus that I loved, that I connected with, that I enjoyed. If you're not familiar with the torque steer in this vehicle, essentially there's too much power, although some manufacturers managed to engineer it out, but Ford did not manage to engineer it out. Too much power for the front wheels, so when you really lay into the throttle, it's going to try to pull the car to the side, either to the right or left. So it's just something you need to be aware of the first time you're driving it, because it will catch you off guard if you're not expecting it. And it could create a potentially dangerous situation if you weren't aware that this vehicle does that. Again, it doesn't take long to get used to. I found that after maybe a month of ownership, I was compensating for the torque steer without even having to think about it. You just learn it like anything else, like rolling through the gears. You don't need to think about that once you've become familiar with the vehicle. All right, so what about the reliability? And what complaints or concerns do I have about the vehicle, if any? Reliability's been excellent. I have to say I've had this vehicle for almost 7 years. The only thing I've ever had to replace was the washer fluid pump. And I think that was just unique to my vehicle. When I was searching on the forums, I don't see that being a common issue. So for most people, the ST seems to be a Focus ST seems to be a pretty trouble-free ownership experience. Apart from paint issues. So this year of the Focus ST, and for some reason the blue color in particular, is plagued by a bit of a rust issue. So around the door edges and in the rear hatch, along the bottom edge of the rear hatch, it tends to develop rust. So if you are looking to purchase one of these used, make sure you take a close look for any rust that may be forming there. And I'm not sure exactly why that happens. I do know that when the rear windshield washer is used, or when it rains, or when you go through a car wash, the fluid does pool along that bottom edge, which I would suspect does not help the situation. Another complaint I do have with this car, and it's not something that would bother an owner, because it's something that as soon as you know it's there and you learn that it's there, you learn not to do it. So if you push this vehicle in a corner, it will understeer, like any front-wheel drive vehicle under power. That's not unusual. What's a little bit unusual in the Focus ST, though, it uses what I'll call artificial torque vectoring. So in a proper torque vectoring system, you would use clutch packs to reduce or cut the power to the inside wheels during a corner, and that helps the vehicle to rotate through the corner, to kind of pull itself with the outside wheels. In the Focus ST, for some reason they decided, probably just to save money, that they would achieve torque vectoring by braking the inside wheels instead. So there's no power distribution, no change in power distribution. They simply brake the inside front and rear wheel on a corner. And that's not so bad. I mean, it more or less works in application. The issue is when you're on that limit in a corner. And I tried to film this, but it didn't come out very well, so I don't know if I'll include it in the video. If you're pushing it through a corner, it starts to oversteer, starts to plow out. Your instinct is to let off the accelerator. And as soon as you do that, the vehicle speed reduces, and usually it'll recompose itself and come back under control, no problem in most vehicles. In the Focus ST, because those inside wheels are still being braked, however, you go all of a sudden from understeer to oversteer, to lift off oversteer, which is not unique to the Focus ST. Plenty of cars, maybe any car, if it's pushed hard enough and then let off quickly, will have lift-off oversteer. And what happens again is the weight that was transferred to the back of the vehicle under throttle, under power, suddenly lifts and transfers back to the front of the vehicle. So now there's less traction in the rear wheels and they tend to slide out. And so you can get oversteer even in a front-wheel drive car if you're really pushing it and then all of a sudden you let off the gas. But again, it's only really an issue in the ST. I think it's just made worse in the ST because of that artificial torque vectoring system. All right, so what is the interior like on a 2014 Focus, Ford Focus, and in this case a Ford Focus ST, although the interior on an ST is no different than the base model. I think all that really changed was some of the gauge cluster. They changed the colors and some of the displays in there. You have ST here on the steering wheel, but apart from that, it's just a regular Ford Focus from that era. Materials are decent, I would say. This was $36,000 Canadian when it was new, so it wasn't an expensive or luxurious vehicle. Again, as I said earlier, the GTI definitely has a better interior, higher quality materials, more comfortable. So consider that if the interior comfort level and quality of material is important to you. The Volkswagen Golf GTI might be a better place to start. The dashboard, relatively soft, but there are also a lot of hard plastics. There's gloss black, although you never really touch this part of the stereo because everything can be controlled through the steering wheel, so that tiny amount of gloss black is not a big deal. There are manual controls for all of the HVAC, although you can also control the HVAC through the infotainment, so you have your choice there, whereas a lot of vehicles nowadays you have to do it through the infotainment, which is brutal in some cases. I use the Volvo, for example, the Volvo V60. You had to control everything through the infotainment. And it's not that it doesn't work, but it's cumbersome and distracting and more difficult than it needs to be. Hard buttons are always a nice thing to have. Steering wheel is fairly straightforward. You've got your cruise control settings. You've got, on the left is how you navigate through the HUD screen here. And there's not very many options in the HUD. It's not like a modern HUD infotainment where you can see so much information about the vehicle. It's really more about your mileage, your fuel economy, things like that. On the right side is where you control the stereo. So you've got volume up, volume down, previous track, next track, hang up call, initiate call. And then right in the middle there is the Ford Sync button. So that's the voice activated controls, which actually I have to say work pretty well. I think this was the first generation of Sync. It still says on here powered by Microsoft. I know in later years Microsoft kind of diverged from the Sync brand. It works well. It recognizes what you're asking. It reads your text messages. It reads messages to you in a fairly natural voice. I've been pleased with the Sync system, actually. It's funny, I got into a 2018, my new vehicle is a 2018 Tiguan, and the voice controls are not as good as the 2014 Ford Focus, and I think it was just that Sync system by Microsoft that really helped with the voice recognition. One of the things I like about this is when you do receive a text message, It pops up in the screen so that you can see. There's also an audible chime that lets you know you have a text message, and all you have to do is hit read, and it will read the text message out loud to you. We've got fairly hard plastic on the door panel. Nothing really to speak of here. You've got 4 windows. All 4 windows do have auto up, auto down, which is nice. You can lock out the mirrors, of course, control those electronically. One of the great things about this car, and I'll put a video of it here, is the small cutout mirror, the little convex mirror that you can see in the corner there. That helps tremendously. My new vehicle doesn't have that, and I really miss having that little mirror in there. It gets rid of the blind spots. In my new vehicle doesn't have that, so I'll be buying a convex mirror, the kind you just stick on. But I really appreciate that Ford put that in there by default. In terms of road noise, wind noise, it is fairly loud in here. I don't know if you heard it during the recording in moments where I wasn't talking, but yeah, it's not a well-insulated vehicle. You'll definitely hear the wind and the road noise, but it's not terrible. And again, if you have the stereo on, the radio on, you won't notice it. One thing to be aware of as I'm speaking about the radio, it's not a very good system, even though this is the upgraded Sony system. In the US, it was part of the ST3 package, I believe. Here in Canada, the Ford Focus only came fully loaded. You didn't really have any options, except I think the sunroof was an option. The stereo, it's okay. It's not terrible, but it's certainly not great. And what is terrible is the FM/AM radio reception. As soon as you get maybe about 100 kilometers away from the city, it's almost gone. And even within the city, the reception's not great. It's a little bit fuzzy, a little bit crackly here and there. I was surprised, actually, in this vehicle, just by how bad the factory stereo is. So no, I guess I said it wasn't terrible. And the sound quality's not terrible, but I came from a Harman Kardon system in my Dodge Magnum, and I don't know why every vehicle just doesn't use Harman Kardon. It's a Harman Kardon, rather. It's a beautiful stereo system. So as I mentioned earlier in the driving video, these seats are tight, but I mean, you can see I still have room. There's still play there. If you were a much larger person than I am, they would probably not be very comfortable. I'm kind of right at the edge there of what would be acceptable. So if you weighed any more, I could see why these garnered some criticism when the vehicle first came out. I wouldn't say that they're comfortable seats, but they're not uncomfortable either. I've never had any issue with them. It is a stiff seating surface. The artificial leather is fairly stiff. It is artificial leather, by the way, which frankly I prefer. Real leather, of course, is nicer to the touch, softer, smoother, whatever we want to call it. But artificial leather, so much easier to maintain, so much easier to clean. The sun, it doesn't get damaged by the sun. It's just set it and forget it, really. I've only ever had to just wipe it down to keep it clean. Whereas leather, you have to be a lot more fastidious to make sure it doesn't degrade over the years. As I mentioned in the driving video, it is a 6-speed manual transmission, a fantastic transmission, easy to shift. You're easy to find your gear. You never miss your gear. The clutch is well weighted. You know exactly where the engagement point is. Unlike, for example, a Subaru WRX that I drove, not a terrible transmission, a good transmission still, but it took a lot more getting used to in the WRX. The clutch was just a lot more difficult to feel out and know where that grab point was. What's handy about this transmission also is it has a little lockout, so you cannot go into reverse. It hits a wall unless you lift that lock up, and then you can get into reverse. So again, a very beginner-friendly transmission. You're not going to accidentally go into reverse, and as I said, you never even miss a gear in this. So you do have heated seats here, not cooled seats, and as well as a 12-volt plug. As I mentioned in the video earlier, the cup holders have a good depth, good size, no problem there. The issue is these thick plastic tensioners that are meant to hold the cup in place. They certainly do hold the cup in place, but they hold it too well. It's very difficult to remove something from the cup holder. And as I said, if you have a styrofoam cup, they can even puncture the styrofoam cup and cause it to leak into your center console there. So I would not put styrofoam or anything particularly weak into this. If I was going to be keeping this vehicle even longer, I would finally get around to just cutting these off with a Dremel tool because they really serve no purpose. So the vehicle does have a sunroof, relatively small one, but it's there, and it's nice to have. The only thing is that it's fairly far back in the vehicle, especially if you're a shorter person and you've got your seat moved forward. You really don't get to see out of the sunroof unless you're parked and you're looking up. I mean, not that you should be staring through the sunroof as you're driving anyway, but on a lot of vehicles, the sunroof is a little bit further forward, so you can at least see it in your peripheral vision, and it gives it more of that open air feeling, whereas this sunroof doesn't contribute much in terms of creating that open air feeling, but it is nice to have. Of course, it adds weight towards the top of the vehicle, so a lot of people didn't option the sunroof on this and other performance-oriented vehicles, but I think a sunroof is always nice to have. No issues in terms of the reliability. It's never leaked or anything like that. So rear seat room is actually pretty good. I've got my seat set where it would be if I were driving, and I'm 5'10", and I have plenty of knee room. They also put these cutouts into the seat so that you have even more room if you had a taller driver. There's plenty of space back here. Headroom is good, no issues there. I've got about 2 inches above my head. And again, I'm 5'10", so you could comfortably sit someone up to 6 feet back here. If you were beyond 6 feet, it might start to get a little bit tight. The rear seats are comfortable, even softer in some ways than the front seats. I have no complaints about the rear seats at all. I haven't spent any time back here, of course, and I haven't had occasion for a lot of rear seat passengers either, but it's a pretty comfortable place to be. There is a 12-volt power supply back here. No USB though, but again, from 2014, you wouldn't really expect that. You can pull down the center here. There are a couple of armrests here, again, with these terrible plastic pieces. I've never used them, but again, they're probably just as bad as the ones that are in the front, unfortunately. This is very padded, so that would actually be an excellent armrest. I wish they had padded the center console in the front of the vehicle as well as they padded this. So the rear seats fold down quite simply. There's a button at the top here. It is a 60-40 split. As you can see though, the headrest does run into the back of the seat in front, either driver or passenger. You can move the front seat forward, which will allow the back seat to fall far enough forward. It is a bit of a pain though, having to move the seat back and forth and back and forth. So it's a lot easier if you're going to do that to simply remove the headrest, and especially if you want to use the flat folding feature. So I'll show you what that looks like. So there's a button on the side here that you can use to remove the seats. Unfortunately, the headrest does run into the roof. So in order to remove the headrest, you have to tilt the seat forward, pull the headrest out, and then you can put it back. And you can just store the headrest down there on the floor. One of the interesting features of this vehicle, and something I didn't even realize until well into my ownership, is that you can lift up on the bottom of the seat, and that creates a space now for the rear seat to fall into, and that creates a level load floor. Well, not entirely level. There's a bit of a lift here. I don't know if you can see that in the video, maybe a 3-inch lift, but it does create a large, relatively level floor space. So if we come around to the rear of the vehicle, you can see it does come with a convenient privacy cover. As you lower the hatch, the privacy cover also lowers automatically and raises automatically, and it's very easy to attach or detach. To get rid of that, all you have to do is pull out these plugs on either side and give it a knock. It's a little bit awkward because you have to turn it to remove it, and then of course you have to find some place to put it. But if you do have a very large item that you need to get into the back of the vehicle, you can remove it relatively simply. So with the front passenger seat pushed all the way forward, and with the rear seats in the flat orientation, we can see you have a total of 58 inches of space from the back of that back seat there, or that portion of the bench that folds forward, right back here to where the hatch is going to close. So the edge of this plastic here, 58 and actually 58.5 inches. In terms of width, You've got a subwoofer here that cuts off about 3 inches. So if you have the model with the upgraded stereo and the subwoofer, across you're looking at about 37 and a half inches, which is almost a twin size bed. So if you didn't have that subwoofer, you could theoretically fit a twin size mattress in here, but you wouldn't have it lengthwise. Believe me, I would have loved to use this for camping, but it's not long enough for someone my height at 5'10" to actually sleep in. All right, so this is the exterior of the 2014 Ford Focus ST. It's somewhat more aggressive, I think just different enough than the base Focus that it's easy to identify. The first thing you're going to see, of course, is that red ST badge on the front and rear. That black honeycomb grille is also a very attractive touch. I'm curious what you guys think about this compared to the 2015. In 2015, they did an update and changed the exterior styling, most notably the headlights and taillights. A lot of people prefer the older style, myself included, but a lot of people preferred the 2015 update. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. When it comes to the door, this is unique in that Ford chose to incorporate the door into the existing lines on the vehicle underneath the taillight here, which I thought was a pretty cool feature actually. I've never seen another vehicle that did that. It's usually just out in the middle of nowhere by itself. Has anyone ever been bothered by the look of the fuel door? Probably not. I could have done without this though. They put a little indentation here. It looks like a dent to tell you where to push to open it. That wasn't necessary, I don't think. In terms of lighting, the Focus ST had excellent headlights, utilizing xenon projectors rather than the halogen setup that many of its competitors were using at the time. They cast excellent light with a sharp cutoff. The ST had what I consider to be very attractive daytime running lights. This shot is overexposed, but in this shot you'll see what I mean. The design of the headlights overall was very attractive in my opinion, and in fact the headlights, along with the grille, drew a lot of comparisons to Aston Martin at the time. The turn signals were old school halogen, however. They worked perfectly fine at night, but during the day were considerably less visible. The same is true for the rear of the vehicle. The Focus also had signal lights in the wing mirrors, but as you can see, they didn't do much at all during the day. In this video, you can see what is actually one of my favorite things about this vehicle, and something that I specifically looked for when buying its replacement. When you're driving at speeds of 32 kilometers an hour or less, when you either activate a turn signal or simply turn the steering wheel, an additional light turns on to illuminate the road on the appropriate side. I didn't realize how much I appreciated this feature until I drove a vehicle without it down a dark country road at night. It helps tremendously to be able to see where you're turning before you're already 30 or 40 degrees committed to the turn. The interior lighting was actually very good for its time. Nothing compared to a modern Mercedes, of course, but the ability to select from one of 7 colors for the cup holders, door handles, and footwells was pretty novel in 2014 and could be controlled very easily by a dial just behind the rearview mirror. That was the 2014 Ford Focus ST. If you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. The more subscribers I have, the more access I'll have to a variety of vehicles to review. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next page.